Hi, everyone, and welcome back to season two of USC's Pass the Mic. For this week's topic, we'll be talking about representation. My name is Jordan.
I'm Kristie.
I'm Sydney.
And I'm Alexis.
And like I mentioned, we're going to jump right into our topic of representation. And just to set the stage for us, I think it's best if our members today just go ahead and explain a little bit about their identities and positionality that they identify as, just to serve as context before we dive into this deep discussion. So I can go ahead and kick us off. So my name is Jordan, like I mentioned, and just the way that I identify my positionality. First, one of my major identities is being African American or Black. I feel like that heavily influences and plays a role into my upbringing and my cultural competence. And alongside that, also being female, cisgendered, um, that also plays a big role into how I navigate higher ed as well and my upbringing and cultural competence. Um, Following that, I am also come from a single parent household raised by a single mother, um, and also identify as being low income for majority of my life due to being a single parent. I also identify as being first gen, um, and I also, yeah, I think that's kind of encapsulates a little bit about me. So now I can go ahead and pass it off to my colleagues.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristie, and I am also a first year in the EC program. I identify as female, first gen, Asian American, and low income. My biggest identity that I feel that I really connect with is that I am Asian American. I grew up in a household that was filled with a lot of STEM majors, so a lot of my cousins and parents, they really wanted me to be a doctor or engineer, something of that type. So I actually did start off college being a bio major, but it wasn't something for me. And that's something that I really hold to my heart, that I have that experience of being a bio major, but now I'm pursuing education, which isn't something my parents initially wanted, but they're slowly embracing. The first generation part comes in with having to navigate college on my own. As Jordan said, it was really difficult dropping out of a four-year university to go back down to a community and back to another four-year university. It was a lot of self-reflecting and like discovery as well. So I really feel that first gen Asian American identity. Yeah, that is my experience. I'm gonna go pass it on to the next person.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney, and I identify as Asian Pacific Islander. I am specifically Cambodian Chinese. Both of my parents immigrated here to America from Cambodia when they were very young. So proud daughter of immigrant parents. I am second generation. My dad both my parents pursued higher education. My dad also pursued an advanced degree. Additionally, I identify as being cisgender and female. I originally grew up in a very dense API community, and I think that really shaped my upbringing just because it was sort of like being in a bubble. I was surrounded with a lot of other individuals who had very similar upbringings, came from very similar backgrounds and cultures. And I was originally a K through 12 education major in undergraduate. So I was intending to become a teacher and then later become a principal. But as I sort of got into higher ed, I ultimately made the switch, and I haven't looked back since. So that's a little bit about my identity, and I'll go ahead and pass it to Alexis.
Thank you so much, Sydney, and thank you all for sharing your guys's a little bit about yourself. I feel like in each like response, I felt like I was able to resonate with you all in one way or another. But just to deep dive a little bit about me and my positionality and identity. So again, my name is Alexis. My pronouns are he, him, is. I feel like I have a lot of identities. So I think first off, I am first generation as well. Um, which a lot of I've been able to like resonate a lot with my fellow like friends and colleagues. I'm also a student of color, a male of color specifically. And when I say that, because in the field of higher education, especially in the field of counseling, there isn't actually a lot of men pursuing counseling. So I feel like I'm like one of the few people that is pursuing into that route at the moment. So I feel like that has slowly been shaping me in the way how I go about into the field, as well as coming from a low socioeconomic community in like Southeast Los Angeles. So, again, you know, being part, being considered low income had a lot of challenges up the way, both like financially, mentally, and physically, especially with my education as well. I've had a lot of lack of access of education compared to like fellow like colleagues that I've met over the years. So it has shaped me into the way how I view education and why I'm in this field. Um, and then I'm also, I have proud parent immigrants. They immigrated from El Salvador. I don't see a lot of Salvadoran representation a lot within the United States, which is something that I've like was eye-opening to me in this program. So really trying to represent the best that I could for my family's like home country, and as well being a part of the LGBTQIA community. There's not a lot of us out here as well in the field of higher education. I feel like I've seen slowly more, but again, having these different intersectionalities and like kind of like dissecting them like each by each has really like given me a wider perspective, like, oh, okay, like, I identify with these so many different positionalities, but at the end, but ultimately, um you know when I put them all together, I'm like, oh, like I don't see a lot of people like me. So it's kind of shaped me again, like how I'm in the field of higher ed. So I'm just like, that's just a little bit about me, and I'm looking forward to see how we dive deep into this today. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And just thank you everyone for sharing about your identities. I think it was really great to kind of reflect on our positionalities and our identities as we sort of start to talk about representation in higher ed, because I think it's important that we reflect on who we are and where we are now to sort of see where we want to go with representation in higher education. So I just thought that was a really great starting point for us. So one of the first things that I sort of wanted to ask our group is, how has our identities, and our multiple identities that we have, impacted our stay and our experience at USC? So I'll give everyone a little bit of time to think about it, and then we can go ahead and start sort of sharing out.
I can go ahead and start. So when I came to USC, I know I didn't have any expectations, but me and the cohort, I realized that a lot of people didn't look like me. Like I felt like the only Asian in the room sometimes. And if it like growing up, I've always been surrounded by Vietnamese people. Like I come from Westminster, which is known to be a very densely Vietnamese populated city. So my whole yearbook was full of Nguyen's and Phams. So coming to the program, it was almost like a culture shock because I really didn't know how to relate. And I was honestly very shy too, just because I don't know, like I honestly do feel like I am able to vibe better with like Viet people. But as time went on, I realized that, like I am who I am and I bring a unique perspective to the program. And yeah, I think it's been a lot of like growth for me. At least I hope everyone's growing here in the program, obviously, but it just shows that there needs to be more, I guess, Asian American representation in the higher education system. And that's what I want to bring to community colleges. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Kristie. And kind of bouncing off like what you were saying, I sort of had a similar experience to you. So I grew up in Monterey Park, which is like a super densely Asian community. And so like you, growing up, pretty much every face that I came across, elementary, middle, high school, majority was an Asian student population. So, sort of growing up, probably until I went to college, I didn't really know anything else aside from that. And even then, when I went into college, I sort of surrounded myself with other APITA identifying individuals as well. So I feel like I kind of put myself in this bubble. So it was really interesting when I first came to USC, and particularly with our program, that I didn't see as many Asian identifying students. And that was really interesting to me. Not because of anything, but just because that was really the first time where I didn't have as many Asian identifying counterparts in our program. And so for me, that was a really big thing. And the other one was also for me as someone who majored in education and then now coming in to study educational counseling here at USC. I thought that originally, I thought a lot of the other individuals in this program would also be coming from an education background. So I was definitely very pleasantly surprised to find that most of the people in our program actually come from a different major, whether it be like sociology, psychology also seems to be a popular one. So I think everyone's coming from like very different walks of studies. And I think that's great because everyone sort of brings different perspectives into our community space, rather than just like, all of us sort of like majoring in education like I originally thought. Then I think we would have had like we might have had more similar experiences and perspectives versus now we have a bit more diverse, I guess, like group of voices and diverse experiences with, what we've studied in our experience. And I think that that creates a nice conversation in our classes. But kind of similar to you, Kristie, just sort of looking, to really help foster that APITA community in higher education and hopefully looking to see more representation in higher ed with API individuals as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Sydney and Kristie. I was taking notes just because I feel like so many different speaking points and talking points I wanted to mention sparked from you guys talking, and I appreciate your transparency and vulnerability in sharing, your experiences, because I feel like coming into this program in particular, there's not a lot of like interactions you can get, especially with our circumstance. Being post-COVID, I feel like we're the first kick at things all back together. So it's definitely hard to navigate. So I appreciate, us taking up the space to kind of deep dive into what it looks like to be a person at USC who has so many different intersections. So I first want to start off by echoing kind of what Sydney and Kristie mentioned about kind of only being like one of the only people, like one of the only minorities are like represented in the group. So for me in particular, being African American, I'm one of two Black people within the EC program. And so that's at first it was very like hard for me to comprehend, but at the same time I had to take a step back, and this has kind of been my reality growing up the entire time. Unfortunately, throughout my K through 12 experience, I was typically the only Black person as well. I grew up in a mostly or predominantly Hispanic neighborhood or community. So yet again, I was still the only Black person. So as much as I've experienced that, it still is hard to navigate. And so coming into this program, I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be like that. But when I saw those outcomes, it's like, wow, like I really am one of those few numbers who's kind of making and paving the way inside higher ed. So it's definitely something you're familiar, but still not comfortable with. Which brings into like my next topic of like imposter syndrome. Being that I'm only one of the few Black people, I sometimes feel like I don't belong, and that I don't blend in. So sometimes when I'm walking through campus, I feel like, wow, like I'm the only person who's Black walking through this like entire campus. Like I rarely see one or two, maybe three other Black people. So it's definitely hard for me to comprehend, especially going to PWI. Like it's something that we obviously know, but experiencing it live and like the current is totally different. So it's like I don't blend in most of the time, and it's something that like I'm trying to embrace, but it's definitely really hard. Um, and then that also brings up like my next topic of like I sometimes get afraid to take up space. Like as much as I have so many good thoughts and ideas, like I sometimes get afraid to speak my voice or to raise my hand or to kind of initiate conversation with people because I don't know how they're going to look at me and how my outward persona is going to be taken to people who might not know who I am and what I represent. And it's kind of hard to like navigate that, especially because when I talk in my classes, I have my guard is completely down. I don't care. But it's like when I talk in the bigger groups or with other people who I'm not that I don't have that sense of community with, it is hard to navigate. So I know sometimes like in the EC program we'll have big collective classes and it's kind of hard to take up space when I don't feel that comfortability or I don't see people who look like me also taking the way and leading the way to also take up space. And I feel like often like it's shamed upon for people of color, in particular Black people, to take up space because it's like you're seen, not heard. So it's really hard to navigate that. Um, then that kind of like also brings up other emotions of feeling like alienated and not having something to relate to because like I said, when you're the one of few, it's like and you're not afraid to like speak up, it's like wow, like I really am one of one here. So it's kind of really difficult to navigate. Um, but outside of looking at my just my ethnicity, I also want to bring up one identity that I forgot to mention earlier was being an only child. And I feel like that also plays into role all my other identities as well. So being an only child and also being first gen, it's like a double whammy. Like you I don't have siblings and you're doing it by like you're the first one to do it. It's like wow, like could it be any worse? But it's not really that bad when you have other people, coincidentally in my cohort, who are also only child. So it's kind of ironic that, you know, we are only child, but there's a lot of us here. I thought that was really interesting considering like only childs have no siblings. So yeah, like as much as I feel alienated, I know there's other identities that I intersect with that I have common ground with other people, and only child seems to be one of them. And also being first gen, I know that a lot of us kind of echo and play into that as well too. So, yeah.
Oh my God, Jordan, I low-key forgot that we're both only childs, and you reminded me that I was an only child, which is also something that I had to learn to grow or like grow up with, because being first gen is like you could have it could mean that you have siblings that went to college and you could still ask them for help. I'm sure like we both experienced like not having anyone to go to. And I feel the same way sometimes when I'm so confident in class to also share, and almost like I can trust that I have no filter and people will want to hear what I say. But in the workplace, it's a little different, I guess. I still feel like they're always telling me that I'm welcoming enough to voice my opinion and give suggestions, but at the same time, like I don't know if these are suggestions that people want to hear in a way, because like I am new to the scene, which is also an identity by being a first year EC student. So I don't know if I have enough talking power to give these suggestions, but that is something I am also struggling with. And then I think Alexis has something to say.
Yeah. Oh my God. I think when all you three were talking, like, I'm not lying. Like, I had my jaw dropped. Like, but not in a bad way. Like, I think I didn't look at when you guys were talking. I saw a common theme where it just stood out to me how you all three felt like at some points during the program that you guys felt like the only like minority like in the room, I guess you could say. I hope I'm saying this correctly. And so like before I even start off with like me, I really just want to emphasize and reassure that like I think just seeing all three of you so far, like in the first year of the program, I've seen like your guys like contribution, your voice, your opinions, experiences, and ideologies. They honestly do make a difference for the majority of us here in this program. So we're like honestly, like for me personally, I'm so grateful to have like the three of you, like particularly like in this discussion, but also in this program, because all three of you, I have like really showcased like very important like talking points and very different like maybe like perspectives that maybe myself or other people in the program maybe have not thought about. So I just really want to put that out there because I'm just like because when you guys were talking about this, leading now to my experience, I actually felt like as an undergrad. So it was really interesting that it's like the reverse for me, I guess you can say in a way, because undergrad, I felt I was the only like Latino person of color, or I was the only Salvadorian within like the Latino community in undergrad. And it wasn't until I came to this program because coming to this program, well, keep in mind, this is the only school that accepted me. So I had the expectations like, oh, like here, like white people, no one's gonna look like me. I'm like, here I go. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna expect. And so I think what caught me really off guard was seeing a lot of not just people of color in general, which is beautiful because I think there's only like one white person in our program, but the vast majority being Latino. And in a way that made me feel safe and I felt so much better. But now also hearing you guys, I'm like, oh, like I understand where you're coming from because I've been there at one point. Um, so yeah, and then I think just coming into within like USC, like like my identity. I also didn't mention this either. I am also a transfer student. So being a transfer student and starting from there into the master's program, like Jordan mentioned, there was this sense of imposter syndrome because I feel like I don't know why. I think it's because of that negative connotation of like transfer student when you go to a community college, you're like, oh, like you must be stupid or XYZ, or they have like these like different reasonings on why negative reasonings why you go to a CC. And so I kind of felt like that in the beginning, just knowing that like, do I really belong here? Like, am I really like at USC? Like, did I get here by mistake? Like how did this happen? Like by luck or something. But I don't feel like that anymore, due to having like people like you, like hearing your guys' story and seeing how you persevered and became resilient in your guys' situation. So that's been very comforting to know, as well as being in a community with again with queer Latinos and seeing a lot more Salvadorians here. I feel like, oh my God, okay, like if I'm not the if I see a group of people that have almost identical I like identities as me, then I feel like I can make it and I can do it. Um, and so it was just it's been a very interesting road. And I think another thing I really want to talk about is like my upbringing, especially the environment that I grew up in. Like I know I mentioned I'm from like the Southeast Los Angeles area. I'm specifically from the city of Southgate. So like, you know, I also call South Central my home, but I know it has its negative like, you know, stereotypes, negative like connotations behind the community. And so just growing up there in general, it's always been an issue of like lack of education, lack of safety, and so forth. And so I feel like because of my upbringing and what I had to endure from childhood even to now, ever since I moved back home, I feel like my view on education has really changed a lot. Like for example, like I'm surprised that I'm even in this field because I used to hate school. I was like, oh my God, school, like, why am I even here? Blah, blah, blah. I always had the negative connotation because growing up, school was seen always as like, oh, like a dread, like, why am I here? But then coming into USC, I feel like I was able to grow my love for it again. And especially seeing myself in other people and other students that I'm working with. I feel like this program has really helped me become more self-aware, reflect, and just um, ground me into understanding and redirecting to my why am I here? What is my purpose? And what do I want to do out of this? So yeah, I'll stop there because I feel like, you know, with more that I want to say, I feel like that might lead into our second um, our second question that we have. So yeah.
Thank you so much for your input, Alexis. I agree too. I was like, I don't like school, and yet I'm here trying to work in a school in the future. It's kind of weird. But our second topic is, we came up with the question, how did I get here at USC EC? And I can start off by answering this. Very similar to Alexis, this was the only school that accepted me for some reason. So I just went for it. I initially wanted to go just for the opportunity to move out of my parents' home, because that's something I wanted to do for a long time, which I never got the chance to do. So besides that point, it's been very fun. But I don't know, this question is so hard for me to answer, because I think me before the program is way different than me like 1 week into the program. Like, I feel like I have so much insight about, not just, to be corny, not just the world, but how higher education works. Like, I really understand the value of an education now, and how it should be a right rather than a privilege for all students. And that's something I know that we're all working towards. So honestly, to answer this question, how did I get here at USC EC? It kind of doesn't matter to me, because I really came into this field to move away from my parents' house, but I am hopefully coming out of it with a better purpose in life. Maybe we can hear from someone who has a better answer, like Jordan.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty. Like, Kristie, I feel like gaining your independence and moving out of your parents' household is definitely a good motivation and factor to better yourself and pursue education. Because at the end of the day, an education is something that no one can ever take away from you. So why not try to make that experience the most memorable you can? And like I said, gain your independence. I really appreciate your honesty. I wish I could move out of my parents' household, but with this economy, and we're not working like normal jobs yet, like it's hard. So I applaud you too, for being able to do that. That's a huge milestone. It definitely deserves to be celebrated and acknowledged. So thank you for that. Um, and then in terms of how I got here, so coincidentally, like I feel like even in high school was easy, like, and undergrad too. I never liked school, but I was just good at it. Like, it's something that I never really stressed, or obviously there's stressful moments when I procrastinate or having test anxiety and things like that. But school's always kind of been like, getting by. I'm not sure if I'm just conditioned or delusional to think that I'm just getting by and I'm just used to it, but school's just been like one of those things that I've kind of been good at, and I've leaned into that. So in high school, I did the IB, or International Baccalaureate program. I didn't end up passing all my exams, but I passed a good amount of them, getting me some college credit, which landed me to go to San Jose State University, majoring in Soc and minoring in child development, where I fell in love with sociology. Obviously, sociology is a very hard topic to digest, because it's very, for me personally, it would always make me feel like, I hate it here. Like, I don't want to live in America. I don't want to do any of this. It's so ugly. Like, all the different levels of inequities and injustice going on. It's like learning about it. It just like enraged me even more to do something about it. And so with all the topics I talked in Soch, because there's so many different like nooks and crannies of it, the field of education sparked my interest. And I was like, wow, like I was fortunate enough to have like a positive experience in education, but I want to continue to have a stronger impact on those who decide to pursue higher ed and navigate that. Well, prior to like narrowing down on higher ed, I just wanted to focus on it on K through 12, and then slowly I realized that wasn't the best footing, which got me to higher ed. But I remember in like my junior year of undergrad, I interviewed a current advisor who I was going to like help me navigate like my courses and get ed plans made for me. And I was like, wow, like you do this for a living? Like I would love to do that. Like you get summers off, you get weekends off, you get all the holidays off, you get spring break, and like who doesn't want to celebrate spring break when they're an adult? Like I was like, wow, that'd be a good fit. And so through my interview with her, I was like, wow, like I think I want to pursue this. And so I kept that thought in the back of my mind, and that kind of kept me pushing. And as I continued learning more in social and looked into education, I was like, wow, like I need to pursue for one a master's degree because I can't stop now. And two, I want to lean into like what it means to be an advisor or a counselor and explore academia more. And so through that, I kind of found myself around people who have the same type of morals or values as me. And I remember I had a classmate who got into USC. I think they went into social work, but I was like, oh my gosh, they got into USC. Like, I would love to go there. Like, side note, obviously, like San Jose State is not the most prestigious school, so I kind of played it safe. So I was like, if I'm gonna go to my master's, I need to go big. And I'm like, my colleague or my classmate did so like they're on the same path as me. They got into USC. Like, I need to shoot for the stars. And I was fortunate enough to like get in, and that's how I got here. But I feel like my whole story kind of relates to like having a passion and leaning into it and then setting your goals. Um, I got into here and University of Maryland for the same program. Um, and so I was debating between like what I wanted to do. And I just went with my gut in terms of like, I worked my butt off at undergrad to, get a really good GPA and make myself an excellent candidate that I was like, okay, like I need to go put my hard work into getting into a really good university. And I decided to pick USC. And although all of us know it comes with a really expensive price tag, it's probably been one of the most like wonderful experiences I've ever had. Although I have this long commute and long days and long nights, it's like I love it here. Like my community, the sense of like love and compassion I feel with everyone, it's like intense. Like it's so much more than just like classmates. It's like we're all in our little community and family. So yeah, side note, that was like kind of different, but I just really love my experience so far.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kristie and Jordan. I think everything that you said was, um, I think it was so amazing. I think that a lot of us in this program can relate to what both of you were sharing as well. Um, so I guess kind of just to share a little bit about um, whether I see like myself represented at USC. I kind of want to bring up a point that Alexis mentioned earlier, which was that he noticed an underlying theme was that we all felt like we were the only minority, sort of like representing our groups when we were in the EC program, maybe in the beginning. And I thought that was really interesting because, and I'm not sure how everyone else felt about this, but I've never felt that way before until I came to USC. And I think a big reason for that was just because I grew up sort of alongside people that came from a similar background. And I think that that was something I maybe took for granted. Right. Like even in high school, it's just like, oh yeah, like, everyone is like, it's a predominantly Asian high school. It was something I never really like thought about. And it was just kind of in the back burner. And it wasn't until I actually stepped into USC and the EC program that I started wondering like, oh, are there other like APITA identifying individuals here? And it was sort of like, oh, all of a sudden, like there aren't as many people who look like me or may share like a similar background. And that was sort of the first time I've ever felt like that in a school setting. So I thought that that was really interesting when Alexis brought that up. And kind of just like tying it back on like whether we see ourselves like represented in USC, I would say there's a decent amount of like APITA identifying staff here at USC. I've gotten the chance to connect with some of them a lot. There's a good portion that were from either the EC or PASA program and are now working at USC. But I remember like when I was in undergrad and I was going through like student services, I remember that I didn't have any APITA identifying like student services professionals. And while they were like, they still provided so much support and they had such a big like impact on me, I think initially it was just kind of hard to relate just because like we didn't have like a shared background, and it was kind of hard finding someone that identified like with me. And I remember when they first told us that there was going to be like with like our EC faculty, I remember when they released like one, and there was like an Asian professor, and I remember like being very like shocked and excited, and it was like, wait, there's gonna be an Asian professor instructing an EC course, like how cool is that? And then like I sort of got to reflecting like, why is that something that's like exciting and amazing, and not something that's just sort of like, I guess like that feels more normalized. And I guess it got me to thinking about like, in terms of like us and my position, and why I may or may not see myself represented here at USC. I guess one of the things to keep in mind is that I know it takes a lot of like privilege to be in this space in EC. There's the financial aspect. Just of course, the USC tuition is really expensive. And so I know that in addition to finding some sort of financial means to support ourselves in the program, I know that the price tag itself can already dissuade people from wanting to even apply to the program, just because it is a very pricey program. So I think that there's just like two layers of privilege. Like first, having some sort of financial mean to afford it, whether it be, taking out loans or scholarships, whatever the case might be. And then, the second layer to that one is, the fact that we felt comfortable enough to apply. Just because, again, I know that because of how pricey it is, that can kind of dissuade others from sort of pursuing this particular degree, which, could have an impact on why we may not see ourselves so heavily represented within EC. And I guess the second thing is also like, I guess it's also a privilege to sort of know what you want to pursue, right? I think in order to know that you want to pursue educational counseling, which is in higher ed, you must have had the privilege of going to a higher education institution before. Just because higher education, like counseling and student services, is such a niche field, we really don't know about it until we actually interact with these professionals at a higher education institution, whether it was an undergrad or, students took courses in transfer before. You need to have had some kind of privilege to find yourself in a higher education space, to have interacted with these professionals, and to have learned about the field of educational counseling and student services in order to sort of decide that you wanted to pursue this field. So I think that even just the fact that we're here is also like, a reminder of some of like that privilege that we've had of, getting to have interacted with these individuals in the past, of, knowing that this was something that we wanted to pursue in itself holds a lot of privilege as well. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Alexis.
Thank you, Sydney, and like thank you all for like the transparency, the vulnerability, the honesty, and like the perspective. Like I was like snapping my fingers. I was like, "That's a slay right there." I'm like, "Oh, I know that's right." And there was someone like, "Oh, that's really interesting." Like I never thought of it like that. I want to touch upon some points that Sydney said when she was talking. I was taking a lot of mental notes. The first one being your comments, Sydney, saying about just knowing that we're here, like the power and privilege behind it. Cause like, I remember mentioning it in class. I think I said it in Dr. H's class or in someone else's class. I was like, I'm just like, it is a privilege, and we have that power that we're in a space where, we're all from different experiences, different backgrounds, different ideologies, upbringings, and all that. But we're in this room together, and as like as a community, as a united front, just really learning from one another and building upon each other. And so I think that brings in a lot of power and privilege behind that. And this is coming from someone like me who always had a viewpoint, a POV of like always being part of the disadvantaged, the minority group, the one who always had to be on quote unquote survivor mode, growing up and even now. And so it was a really good like kind of like reflection, I guess I can say, knowing that, oh my God, like we are in this room and in a like we're gonna be that face of change really in the future. And I strongly believe that there are gonna be individuals who have similar or almost identical intersectionalities as us, who are gonna be like, oh my God, like Sydney's like, look at her, she's like up there. And so Jordan and Kristie and Alexis, like, oh my, and then it's gonna be crazy because like, oh my God, like we were there at one point. So that was really interesting to mention. And also when you mentioned about, the example of like being like shocked and excited about having an Asian professor teaching like an EC course, that's exactly how I felt with seeing like a lot of Latinx professors here. I was surprised to see a lot of them, a lot more than I thought. I was like, oh my God, did we actually made it out? Like, oh my God, like it's not just, for example, white people, like how I always thought, like, and just seeing a lot of just people of color from all different race and ethnicities, like I felt that same way too. I was like, wow, like look at us, like look at us POCs really making it out here. I'm like, I can just only imagine the experiences like they have to endure compared to us, but they made it, and I'm hoping that maybe one day we can be there. So it's really interesting. And then I think just tying into that question about seeing myself in like Sapphire USC, again, seeing a lot of the Latinx professors, I'm like, oh, okay, like, and again, like, I kind of feel like in a safe space. Um, but actually, Dr. Hernandez, she actually made me feel like the safest out of everybody. Because it's really interesting because, like, again, when I mentioned being from Southeast LA, like Southgate specifically, and her sharing that she's from Linwood, like, we're neighbors basically. And so when she first mentioned that in the beginning of the semester, I literally, I'm not gonna lie, it's so ugly for me to admit this, but I low-key almost went into tears because I'm like, wow, there's someone from a low socioeconomic economic community who knows the similar or same struggles that, for example, I went through, and the fact that she has her EDD and she's a professor now working in the field of higher education and she's making a difference, like that, I felt in that moment, I was like, okay, like I belong here. I think I can be that Dr. Hernandez to someone else. So I wanted to put it out there because I'm just like, just this topic of representation as a whole, representation comes a long way. And I feel like a bit repetitive, but it needs to be like a reminder because sometimes we tend to forget, especially since us as grad students, we're like an autopilot going like, go, 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 like on the grind. So it's just a moment to self-reflect and all that. And so, yeah, in terms of that as well. So it's just a really interesting viewpoint to think about. And so, yeah, um, wanted to, before like I just move on, like I just wanted to see if anyone else had anything they wanted like to comment, any questions, before we kind of like move on to like, our next talking points. You don't feel pressured to speak up if you guys don't have anything else to say. Just wanted to open up the floor to everybody else. All right. The little silence said we're good. So I'm glad we were all able to really just um talk through it, and I'm really glad. But before I actually go into the conclusion, there's something that actually stuck with me, and I do not mean to put anybody on the spot. So the reason why I want to bring this up because I think when it comes to representation, again, us having different intersectionalities, I think a common thing that we notice in the EC program is a lot of us being first generation. And I think I can safely say that I think a majority of us are identified as first gen, which is really great because we're in a community together and, kind of we're all in this together, I guess you could say. But Sydney, I know you mentioned in the beginning that you are second generation. And I don't mean to put you on the spot on this, so I really apologize if you feel like any type of way. But this is honestly like out of curiosity, like how has it been like being a second generation student? specifically being in the EC program? Because you hear a lot about the first gen perspective, but I never get to hear second or third gen. So I would love to know like your insight and your experience about that, if you don't mind sharing.
No, definitely. And that's something that I've also talked with some other members in EC about as well. I would just say just because, so I formally identify as second gen by like virtue of my dad having an advanced degree. However, sometimes I also share that I feel more like 1.5 gen just because it was like my parents attended college so long ago. Like there was at least like a 30-year buffer in between when they went to college and when it was my turn to apply, and just so many things have changed. Like I remember my parents telling me like, oh, don't take AP classes, like you're gonna overload. And I was like, taking AP classes are kind of important to get into college. Or they didn't know what Common App was. They didn't really know the difference between a private and a public institution, or that you had to write like different essays for public universities and private universities, and that they didn't know how to apply for scholarships. They didn't know how to apply for FAFSA. So I would say the second gen, I guess, capital was more felt in my upbringing, as in we always had talks about college. My parents were investing for me to go to college pretty much from the day I was born. They provided me with opportunities to learn about like colleges. They took me to like those, like when they had the college fairs, or when the colleges had like those open houses, or whatever the case might be. I was always surrounded with literature at home. I had access to college resources. So I would say the second gen capital was definitely felt through like access to the resources. But I would say in terms of like when it came to actually applying to college and getting to know about the college, I would say that there was definitely a lot of like personal navigation there, just because my parents didn't know. And I think it was a good experience for me just because I got to sort of learn about the process by myself. I got to, ask my classmates like, hey, did you start on your Common App yet? Or how do you even navigate Common App? Why don't we support each other, and sort of like looking at the different resources. So in that case, I think it was like a really interesting experience for me. But I really appreciate like you sharing your experience, and also like sort of asking for me to also share my experience as well. I think it's sort of like a great dynamic to get different perspectives from all of our upbringings as well. So thank you so much, Alexis.
Oh my God, yes, of course, Sydney. I know. When the moment that you mentioned, I was like, okay, at one point I need to ask Sydney this because I need to know. And I think for a lot of us too, because I feel like also as well, when we become educators, either as counselors, academic advisors, or even in the field of student affairs, I feel like we're going to encounter so many students with different like identities, with intersectionalities, kind of like what we have here as a collective group. Like who knows, we're probably going to meet with a student who is identified second generation and might have that same perspective and a similar story as you, Sydney. Or I might meet someone like Jordan and or Kristie, who are first gen, or maybe who identify as Black, Viet, and going through their upbringing and truly trying to navigate to the systems of higher education. So I really appreciate everybody's like POV and sharing like their experience and story. I feel like I learned so much about you, and I feel like there's so much more to like learn about one another, which makes me so excited because I'm like, we got a year to go, so I'm very much excited. And again, yeah, still speaking on the topic of first gen, I know there's for our viewers here, there is another podcast specifically about first generation. So if you want to learn a little bit about that, I definitely recommend checking that out. I know that group has a lot of amazing insight. But moving forward, kind of want to wrap things up a little bit and kind of ask like one final question. It might be a little heavy, so definitely give everyone some time to think about this. So you know, how and where can we foster more representation at USC specifically? Maybe at USC or even outside USC and different other institutions, kind of like plans and hopes for the future. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, so thank you. The first thing that kind of comes to mind, like when it comes to fostering representation here at USC, is just realizing that we're paving the way so that other people feel inclined to do the same thing we are. So in this way, I feel like we're very much like change agents of change, and that makes me feel hopeful in knowing that, you know, my experiences and my shortcomings and my crises are valid and helping the way and helping pave the way for other students. I feel like being selfless is why we kind of come into this role, and our selflessness is what's going to save hopefully millions and thousands of like students who identify the same way as us to step outside of that trajectory of like maybe not going into higher ed, and making sure that like they can do it if they put their mind to it, and that there's no shame or there's no shame or like imposter syndrome related to being here at USC. You know, we're all here and our positionality is valid, and that um, we are agents of change and paving the way. And I think a good way to help reiterate that is just also for me, it's like realizing that I'm more than just a number, I'm more than just a statistic. Obviously, we know that in particular some ethnicities are represented in different ways in terms of higher ed. Like the percentage of Black people who go to pursue a master's is a single digit, I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. But I'm pretty sure it's a single digit. And I'm realizing that, you know, I'm more than a number. I'm fostering representation, and especially here at USC where it's a PWI, like I am paving the way, and I'm more than a number. I'm a human being whose experiences are valid and will help shape the way that we continue. And I know that just getting to know Sydney, Christine, Alexis, like on a personal level and like through classes and do my first year, I know that, you know, we all support and care for each other in a way that honestly sounds really cliche, but we do. And that's what really makes me hopeful, knowing that like we have people like us stepping into the field and changing the way we think about things. It's time to kick those old ways out and kind of be the new administration, the new deans, the new principals, the new all of that to kind of make way so that we continue to have more representation and understanding that like our positionalities and intersections add, and heavily going back to, I think one thing I forgot to mention earlier was just how like the common collective wealth and how we all have things to bring. Although we might not know everything, our experiences add so much to our experience into the classroom, which it can be, which a textbook, which a quiz, a test, a reading cannot give you. So I think that's something to also keep in mind that, you know, our experiences are, our stories are what will continue to make a difference. And I'm happy to know each one of you in a better way moving forward so that, you know, I'm hopeful for all of us.
Thank you so much, Jordan and Alexis. I think like the way that both of you wrapped things up was so like beautiful and like eloquent and articulate. And I think it gives like really good hope for us as we're sort of moving forward. And I guess sort of like, you know, how we can sort of encourage more representation at USC. I think just to be like super real, USC attracts a very specific population, right? Just because it is a very expensive school to go to by virtue, I think it just tends to attract a more privileged student population that, you know, can afford to A, think about going to USC, and B, actually afford that USC tuition. And I think a lot of the times people are dissuaded from applying to USC because of that price tag. And it's really a shame because there are a lot of financial resources, not just provided by USC, but there's a lot of financial aid opportunities that are provided elsewhere as well. But a lot of it goes under the radar, just because a lot of students aren't aware of that, right? And I guess it sort of goes back to that topic of, right, privilege and who has access to these like resources and this kind of knowledge. So I guess like kind of moving forward and how we can foster more representation, maybe not only at USC, but also at other institutions is, as the four of us are kind of intending to work in higher ed, as counselors, as student affairs professionals. One of the things that I guess, we can sort of think about moving forward is how can we sort of share these resources with students as they're planning to apply to higher ed. And for me, just as someone that comes from a K-12 background, I think one of the things that I would really like to see as we're moving forward is how can higher education professionals connect with K-12 professionals so that we can kind of support and provide resources to K-12 professionals early on, so that by default, they can share those resources with their students and sort of foster this college mindset and provide these students with college capital, particularly the students who may not be able to access this college capital at home. Then at least they're sort of having access to it at schools, via their teachers, their admin, whatever the case might be. So I just think that it's one of the things that I'd really like to see moving forward would be, sort of building this community and this partnership between higher ed professionals and K-12 professionals, just so that we're sort of seeing students succeed from beginning all the way through college. So that's sort of where I think, hopefully we could potentially move forward with representation, and increasing that. So that way we can sort of spread this college capital and knowledge to all students from different backgrounds. And I'll sort of pass it to Kristie to see what her thoughts are as well.
Thank you, Sydney. I agree with everyone's points. I think this is something I expressed earlier in the class, but the first generation part of me, I actually really don't like. I really wish that I had it easy. I really wish that things were just handed to me. I wish that I didn't have to figure it out on my own and not have to struggle to be in the same, I guess, like same position as my peers who might have gotten here a little bit easier, but I'm learning to give myself grace for doing all that work on my own. And to answer the question about representation, I think it just starts with us. Honestly, I think it's hard to see representation unless we do the work ourselves by being involved in higher education, which I think is very admirable, because I think a lot of people in nowadays, they really chase the money, but this is definitely a degree of servitude, in my opinion. Educating others has been known to not be so well paying, but I am very happy that there are those who choose to pursue higher education anyway because of our passion for it. And I think that's the representation starts with us branching out to all the different community colleges and higher educations, public, private universities. When I can envision us in the future being counselors or probably administration, like someone of color is the president of a college, and that's where I see us inspiring other students. I hope to live to see the day when a person of color is the president of USC, which I think will be so crazy and so doable. But yeah, I think representation starts with us and the future cohorts that join USC, hopefully. But yeah, that is my answer for that question. And I think we'll wrap it up here. I honestly loved everyone's opinions on all of our discussion questions that we had today. I really think we have a great future ahead of us with basically trailblazers like Sidney, Jordan, Alexis, and obviously everyone else in our cohort. So I think our future, our educational future, and for others is in good hands. Yeah, if anyone wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, Sydney. Oh my God, thank you so much, and just thank you to all. Oh my God, I was taking notes this time, and I was like, yeah, we're just speaking my mind this whole time. Especially Sydney, what stood out to me, especially you coming from a K-12 background, and trying to connect with those students and to like apply and just navigate higher education. I think it's really important within USC or any institution that we just end up going to, just making sure that we can share our own stories, our own upbringing, and really build rapport with like students who might have similar or identical identities as us, and sharing like, hey, if I can do it, so can you. And that really leads into what, oh my God, I'm blanking out on who said this, about really showcasing how to students how to navigate these resources, because for a lot of us it was a little bit difficult. Seems like there's a common thing of like figuring out and navigating on our own to certain extent. And I'm really hoping that us, since we are gaining knowledge and really becoming into the field, that we can ultimately end up making it a lot more easier for our future generations who have our similar identities, to be like, hey, like here is how we can help you XYZ. Let's take you through this process and see how we can go from here. And just ensuring that, because I think my POV, and let I know we all have different like POVs, but my POV is like, I truly believe that students are very academically capable already. I think a lot of it, especially in the field higher ed, is just ensuring that like they just need that support and that reassurance that they can do it. Because I feel like everyone, I think education is a fundamental right to all across the board, especially in the field of higher education in general. And just also, lastly, just showcasing like the passion and love for higher education. I feel like if we showcase that, especially as counselors and administrators in our future, I think that'll make all the difference of having more people of color, and for them to really just maybe perhaps join into the field of higher education. And just like one last thing, I know damn well all of us, I'm gonna manifest this. I know all of us, one way or another, we are going to be deans. We're going to be VPs, presidents of different institutions. And I will not be surprised if one of you guys here, or even in our cohort, ends up being the president of USC. I'm not lying. When I tell you how motivated and inspired I am from all of you, I genuinely mean it from the bottom of my heart, because never have I been in a room of so many different people, but who showcase so much passion and knowledge, integrity, and eloquent just ideologies as a whole. I'm just like, wow, like, oh my God, like I am really lucky that I go to USC despite the money. I'm like, damn, here we are. And I know we're gonna make the best out of it. So I'm very grateful and so excited to see what's in store for us for the rest of the semester, the summer, and our second year and beyond, because this is only the beginning for all of us. But yeah, I want to wrap it up there. I want to thank all of you, all Sydney, Jordan, Kristie. I'll thank myself too for just being part of this conversation and just being open and just being real and vulnerable, especially with the different, intersectionalities and positionalities that we have. I'm hoping that maybe we can sometime in the future continue this conversation within each other or with other people in our cohort or outside, because I think just representation, the word itself, is so important to continue to be talked about, especially as we move on into the profession of higher ed. But to our viewers, thank you so much. We hope you learned something out of this. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you in future episodes. So as of now, fight on, go Trojans, and have a good night.
Good night.